Everyone, Rhiannon here. Uh, I am just making a video to provide you with some more information and context for thinking about and understanding the structural frame from our Bowman and Deal text, Reframing Organizations. This is the sixth edition um, that I've got here. Um, in any case, what I'm going to do in this video is I will give you briefly an introduction to this text and sort of the purpose of using frames and as lenses. And then I will talk to you about the structural frame in particular, and some of my the points that I think pop out from this frame and could be useful for your analysis of your problems. So this text broadly presents a range of frames, or as we spoke about in class last week, a range of lenses through which we can look at particular organizational problems. So the first one that we are looking at through this book is the structural frame. Um, and I think it's a really good one to start with because it very much sort of lays out a traditional approach to thinking about organizations and how organizations operate internally. So one way to think about structure is to understand it as the way that an organization is structured or built or organized. So we can think about it as various systems that are in place, as well as the methods that are developed for making things happen within the organization. And it's also the ways that responsibilities are organized across people. Now, all organizations have a structure, and there are both formal and informal aspects to the structure. And what I mean by that is formal aspects of structure might be sort of the official way that things work. So we can think about, we've talked last class about the school as pyramid or hierarchy. And so there's, particular people at particular points of this sort of pyramid that implies how much power that person has in relation to others, and decision making within the organization. So again, that would be sort of a formal structure of the organization. But there are also informal structures to organizations, and these might be things that are less official, less obvious perhaps, and less enshrined in policy, even perhaps explicit policy. So I'll just give you an example from my own experience as a teacher working in a school. We had a teacher who was an art teacher and also a photographer, a professional photographer, and he spent quite a bit of time like photographing aspects of the school. So photographing school events, photographing just people in the school, teachers, students. And this one could look at this as an element of the school that perhaps is not enshrined in any particular structure. There was no organizational formation that led him to take on this role. And yet it was a very significant role that very much impacted school culture and the daily functioning of the school environment. So we can look at that as an example of an informal structure that was in place. So I think this distinction between formal structure and informal structure can be helpful for understanding organizations, because often I think when we think about organizations or we think about the structural frame, we are thinking about sort of those formal structures that are explicitly enshrined in policy. But I think that if we truly understand structure, that it's more nuanced than that. So as we all know, the school itself has a structure, and it tends to emulate the structure of other schools. So these are formal structural elements. But it's also likely that the school has unique characteristics, things that make it, itself. And these are aspects of informal structure. So I ask you to think about in your own school environment, what are sort of the formal school structural elements that lead your school to take on the identity that it has, and what are sort of elements of your school environment that might be less formal. So if we were in class right now, I would ask you that and we'd have a conversation about that, but I think perhaps you can think about that on your own. Now, another thing I'd like to speak about is strategy, which strategy, in my opinion, has a tight relationship with structure. So strategy, we can think about as the general approach that an organization takes to achieving its goal. A strategy might consist of things like the goal itself, and maybe the goal is, 100% graduation rate or whatever. So there's goals in place, but then we also need to think about, well, how do we get to that goal? And so there's an official plan or an official course of action that is adopted in order to achieve this goal. And there are also perspectives embedded within this. So these perspectives sort of frame where the organization wants to go and how it wants to get there. And there's patterns as well. There's patterns in how decisions are made, who makes those decisions, how they are developed, etc. And then also the organization will take on potentially different positioning in relationship to its environment or other factors. So those things can be unique. A school might position itself in a particular way to the community that it's part of, where perhaps another school might take a different approach. So all of these aspects are a piece of strategy. So we've got goals, we've got an official plan or course of action, we've got a range of perspectives and patterns, and we've got an orientation toward positioning, which are interconnected with strategy. Now, one other thing that I often come back to when I'm thinking about strategy is in my own research, I draw upon social movement theory, which also talks about strategy quite a bit. But then what it does is social movement theory, and social movement theory really is referring to providing a framework for us to understand how social movements operate, why they operate, how they go about trying to achieve their goals and things like that. And so there's within social movement theory, again, there's like this idea of strategy, but there's also this idea of tactics. And I find this to be a really useful distinction that I'm going to sort of bring into the conversation around structure. So again, if strategy is sort of like, here's the overall goal, here's the overall plan that we're trying to achieve, then we can think about tactics as the particular approaches or the particular tasks that we take on, the particular campaigns or issues that we take up, and the particular approaches that we take on with regard to those issues. So I'll give you a couple examples. So for example, perhaps there's an asbestos issue in a school district, health and safety issue. There could be a range of tactics that are taken on to change this. One might be going to the news media. Perhaps there's not enough funding, so you go to the news media and it brings it into significant enough public discourse that then the government redirects money to address the issue. So that would be a tactical approach to trying to solve the problem. Other tactics might be a school rallying to have different board members in place if the current board is not making decisions that would support the removal of asbestos. So again, we can think about tactics as wrapped up into strategy, or tactics as a method employed in order to attempt to achieve the overall goals and the strategic approach. Okay. So other things that I think from the Bowman and Deal chapter that seem significant to me are some of the key components. They talk about, how do we allocate work? How do we differentiate labor? How do we decide who does what tasks? Who takes on what? How many roles we have? And again, what decisions are made around labor allocation? And then also, how do we coordinate diverse efforts after differentiating labor, right? And I think we consistently run into this as a barrier within school organizations. So we have these differentiated roles, but then how do these different differentiated roles work together? Uh, work together or work together in order to achieve a particular goal. So again, coordinating diverse efforts after differentiation of labor, or another way to think about this is integration. um, and I would also like to, if we were in class, I would ask for you to pause and to think for a moment in relation to your problem. How is the work allocated in your school in relation to that problem? So that is something for you to think about as you are going about considering the ways that the structural frame relates to your problem. Um, So you can also ask yourself, how do the labor efforts of different people get coordinated with one another? Are they coordinated well or not? Are there areas for improvement? And how might they be coordinated and allocated better? So those are, I think, are key questions for us to consider in relation to the structural frame as we consider the problems for this course. Now, there's two more points I'd like to raise before I end off this video. The first one is around the idea of sub-optimization. Now, this refers to when individual units perform well on their individual tasks, but that the collective whole adds up to much less than the sum of its parts. And I think we can all think of many examples of this. So people are functioning individually on their own. They're fulfilling their various allocated labor tasks, and yet there's not the synergy and it's not coming together in order to lead to something greater than these various parts. And so how can we optimize what we are doing? And I think you can ask yourself in relation to the problem that you are studying, is there an issue of sub-optimization here? If there is, what might be done in order to maximize the power within your organization in order to better respond to the problem at hand? And then the final point I'd like to talk about is vertical versus lateral coordination. Now, schools are very vertically oriented, I think, right? We think about there's the superintendent, the principal, all the people who fall below, and everybody's on sort of this vertical line of coordination. But I would like to push back on that a little bit. And sometimes I think that often in organizations, what might not be formally recognized is the importance of lateral coordination and who are working together. And how are people working together? Are there structures and systems in place that will support people working together in a lateral approach? And to what extent do we want oversight of people? And how should the oversight work, right? I think we've all had experienced instances where oversight is not structured in ways that is functional and actually could be sub-optimizing the outcomes overall. So if your school is vertically organized, I wonder, are there useful ways to institute lateral coordination in order to address your problem? Is it the case that some things are organized laterally and other things vertically? Are these, appropriate ways to approach the issues at hand? So I think these are things to ask yourself in relation to your problem. And another thing to point out is that vertical forms of coordination can often stifle creativity. And I think we all have felt that, right? So we want to avoid stifling creativity around important items. So really thinking perhaps about where is there space for enhancing creativity in relation to your problem, and are there other methods of instituting coordination across various people? And again, it's also that challenge where we want to also support a structure that operates efficiently, and where people are accountable to others, and where work gets done the best that it can. So I think these are important questions to consider. So that is sort of my video summary of the Bowman and Deal chapter. I hope that feels useful to you. We will spend a little more time talking about this when we meet next. Thank you.